Welcome to the latest Sitting Comfortably podcast. This is Laurel Lindstrom speaking, reading from the Draftsman, my first novel. We've already had several podcasts that cover what goes on in chapters 1 and 2, and this podcast is chapter 3. So, the Sitting Comfortably podcasts. Are you indeed sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. The Draftsman, chapter 3, lines. By the time Joshua arrived from town, Martin was showered and changed into clean blacks and sitting on the sofa, music blasting, Meatloaf's Bat Out of Hell. He didn't notice Joshua come in from the kitchen with a coffee and a village newspaper in hand. Martin got up and started rearranging the dozen bins into a new row, with every other bin some 10 centimetres closer to the terrace than its neighbour. It was a slow, precise process, so Joshua sat down to observe, patient and calm, and enjoying the slow, methodical touch, the precision, and unbidden the thought, all will be well. In the space between tracks, he coughed, and when the last bin was in perfect position, Martin stepped back and glanced at Joshua. With a nod, he reached into his pocket and back out again, snapping as he dragged his hand through his hair. Lunch, have you eaten? It was well past lunchtime, and Alison had warned Joshua about the fags. Shadowhurst was a smoke-free zone. Without a smile, he pointed out that 2 out of 3 ain't bad. What? What do you want about? The track was long over. Joke, Martin. The song, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. It's just you and me. Alison isn't here. No, Alison. See? Just a joke. We're not the bloody musketeers. Martin snarled back, staring at him, eyes shifting high speed side to side as he burned a laser line into Joshua's gently smiling gaze. They too stuck eye to eye, absorbing, sharing, waiting for whatever could happen next. Martin broke first. Alison went home yesterday. She said you were coming. So what happens? Now that we're here, what are you expecting? Joshua, calm and steady on the sofa, the spatulate fingers of his left hand tapping slightly on his left knee, crossed elegantly over his right, a couple of gold bangles on his wrist, a strange contrast with his new Derby shoes, glinted in the soft light, their reflections dancing on the chrome. Gazing wayward at the little holes on his shoe and relishing its fringe decoration and soft sandalwood gleam, he was just waiting, savouring the question, the moment, the attention. Nothing really. I suppose that's the point. Alison and me, we just want you to feel calm, have a bit of a change, that's all. I guess we hope you'll be okay without the job, the office, you know. He picked up the Sussex Argus, reading out loud, "Man suffers life-threatening injuries in tractor fall." The story said that one Julian Nettlesby had fallen off of a tractor as it turned too sharply at the end of a field, leaving Julian Nettlesby flat on his back in a sticky furrow. The tractor had continued randomly on its bouncing way. Eventually, it had stalled and come to a gentle stop in a hedge. According to a woman walking her dog in the adjacent lane who had assisted at the scene, the man, who was smartly dressed and carrying binoculars, appeared to be intoxicated. Joshua, confused and wondering if anyone read this stuff, sighed. He looked up expectantly at Martin and waited some more for an answer to his question. Martin was tapping an irritating rhythm on the nearest bin with a pencil, and instead repeated his question. "Lunch, have you eaten?" Joshua was staring across an empty abyss, empty of emotion, a canyon whose far-off slopes reached steep and high into an unknown void. Somewhere there in that darkness was Martin. Joshua sighed again. "No lunch. We've got too much work to do. We'll get something in the village later. There's an ad in here for a tea shop boasting delicious buns, cakes and light meals." Martin scowled and headed for the fridge. Returning with his mouth full of tuna fish, he mumbled, "Got work." We got all caught up last week." Odd response, thought Joshua, as he explained. "It's not much, just stuff about here, the place. The painting's underway, but what do you want to do about the rest of it? The gardens, the woods, the sheep? Or do you want me and Alison to just handle it?" Okay. Martin answered through his mouthful of smelly tuna fish, careful not to lose a crumb. "Let's do it, even if I've no idea what I want, or even what the choices are." And cake in mind, they sat, with Joshua explaining and Martin querying every option before slowly coming to vague, half-hearted decisions. The gardens, weed them and mow things. The woods, don't know. It's 11 o'clock. That's not part of the story, sorry, that's just me telling you what the cuckoo clock is telling us. Where were we? Yes, the woods. Don't know, it's just trees. The sheep. Black ones and white ones, one for every 300 square meters. Together, later with their cake, Martin counted crumbs and calculated how many bits of mixed fruit were in the slices of fruitcake, and watched as Joshua gazed around the tea shop, unaware that he was observed. Had he known he was under view, he might have blushed. 72 and 239, said Martin conversationally, all irregular. Startled from his reverie, Joshua struggled to focus, so used was he to Martin's long silence. He had been lost in the pale green coolness of the room's walls, strangely comforted by the excessive floral decor, the soft murmur of subdued conversations, and the distant tinklings of cutlery. He heard Martin say, "It's weird, this cake and no fags, being in a place like this. Never done it before. It's just weird." And he crammed in another piece of cake, not counting the crumbs as they fell, or how many bits of mixed fruit were left. Joshua sipped his tea, watching the cake get gobbled up and smiling as Martin reached for another slice, impenetrable and yet clearing that canyon dark. Since starting work some 8 or so years previously, Martin Cox had never taken a day off, had a holiday, or barely deviated from his daily routine. Even after both parents died, his pattern remained the same. He stayed on his daily Morden to Putney route, dogged and determined that nothing was any different, at least not for him. But then he had to move away from the rotting debris of the 3-bedroom semi and into his posh flat next to the park. Joshua had found it, but when Martin finally accepted that he had to move, it was on condition that Joshua meet him every morning. He had to travel with Martin from the flat so that he got to the 93 bus stop at Putney Bridge at the usual time. The conversation had started badly. Standing in his immaculate office, Joshua had watched in amazement as Martin headed for panic and near meltdown when they talked about the new flat. They had already talked about how Martin could no longer live in the old place. Joshua had explained that the house must be sold and that Martin needed to move. He had explained that he had found the perfect place for Martin, a place in town, a place on one floor, easy. Their conversation about the flat had started really quite innocuously, with details of the place, its size, some pictures, and Martin had quietly nodded. "Thanks, Joshua. I know. Thanks for this. Did you tell Alison?" "Yeah. Should be fine." "Take down all the walls, though. I don't want walls there." The meltdown started a little later when Joshua, clipping his briefcase shut on the signed papers, forgot himself for a moment and casually said, "You'll be quicker getting to work from here." Martin, half listening, answered, I know, and then stared at Joshua's briefcase and pinched the bridge of his nose, eyes closed and fighting the buzz and shimmer rising behind them as the notional snapped into the absolute. Fidgeting across the office, pacing the floor and turning at right angles like a hovering fly, following an unseen catacomb path, struggling to find a way out. Alarmed, Joshua could see the panic and tried to sound offhand when he said, "You've already worked this out, though, haven't you?" Hesitant as he waited, watching the right-angled march around the room become a single line of steps back and forth, Martin paced with increased agitation, alternately tapping at the leather desktop of Joshua's immense oak desk and flicking alternative index fingers at a specific blue triangle on the Tiffany standard lamp on the other side of the room. Precision and ping as the hair swung out wild with every turn. As he watched Martin stalking back and forth, Joshua was aware that many brass handles, one for each of the desk drawers, were jingling happily together as the taps on the desk got harder and the paces across the floor got faster. Martin, knowing it's what he'd agreed to, knowing it was all changing, was really changing, a world was slipping away and taking him with it. Adrenaline seeping rapidly cell to cell as the realization and terror rose up and claimed him. "I can't do it. I can't. It's too complicated. It won't work," he blurted, his steps shorter and quicker. I need to get another place, somewhere else. Back and forth, his stride stretching longer again, taut. "I don't know the journey. I don't know. I've never done it. I don't know. I can't." His coat and hair swinging and beating the air with agitation rising, sweeping, smooth and fluid in rhythm. Joshua observed the motion, heard the desktop taps, the pings on the glass and the jingling brass. The combination was almost balletic. Now, for the first time ever, Joshua saw those ice-cold eyes, round and frantic, the intense stare no longer constant, calculated, the eyes instead darting rapidly from side to side, fear flashing, sparking, electric and violent, an almost audible crackle. Joshua, his voice soothing and calm, mouthing barely noticed, deeply inadequate reassurances. "It'll be fine. Once you get to know the way, I'll help you. Don't worry, it will be under control. And you can always cab it if it gets too much." Martin dagger looked back, unconvinced, pulling back his dark hair, holding it tight, his fist clenched, suddenly white and hard, on the edge of being raised. Cigarette ash drifted slow and relaxed from its elevated position, in unexcited contrast, reminding Joshua of fairy dust sprinkled on some hapless innocent who longed to fly. Martin Cox, unsoothed and unreconciled, was suddenly still, suddenly inspired, his face losing its contortions, and suddenly hopeful. "You can help me. You can come with me until I get the hang of it. That would work, wouldn't it? Especially if you were working only for me and had no other clients." This last, with a certain slyness in his tone. He knew this and added, "You'd have nothing else to do." The ash, sliding down his shoulder and away, a curious anointment, was absolving Martin. "What? How would that work? I'm a partner. I can't just leave the firm." Calm and secure, seeing new lines drawn, new definitions, Martin now sighed and stared at Joshua with his usual expression and said, "You resign from the day-to-day and just go in once a week or something. Tell them it's like some sort of early retirement. You can do it. You know you can, and you know I can make it work. That way, you can help me to keep on working. It's what I need. You know it." So, for the sake of an unknown bus route, Joshua Fothergill started working exclusively for his friend, moving from legal and financial advisor to be his business manager and general counsel. The first order of business was the wills, or rather lack of them. Once Martin was at the 93 bus stop in Putney Bridge and counting his way to the office, Joshua dealt with the forms, procedures and notifications. He had helped Alison with the funerals, so this was just an extension, necessary paperwork that neither sibling was interested in. Martin instead stayed buried in black and white lines, marking his empty and his ink-filled spaces in immaculate monochromes. That's the end of the first half of Chapter 3 of The Draftsman. I'll be doing another one shortly, so you can find out what happens next. I hope you're enjoying it, and I appreciate you listening. Thank you. Bye-bye.